Okay, welcome back. Before we go on, I noticed I did make a minor mistake. I'd aliased the strength and defense in the query as item strength and item defense, and then calling them as defense and strength. So we just want to remove the item and the from the strength and defense. So as you can see, we actually receive the values, whereas before it was just blank. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we need to work on equipping these items. So if you look down here on our href a tag, we've set an action to equip with the item ID. So if we take a look back over in our inventory, we're going to probably use a bulk of this code. So what we'll start off by doing is we'll take this opening if condition and close it off, just to make sure the action is set and it's not empty. Okay, so I've also taken out the query from the other script, and as a quick tester I've put down here if the road type equals armor, and we're equipping armor, we'll just echo out equipping armor. Else, if the road type is weapon, we're equipping a weapon. And also from the last one, it also it looks to make sure that we've got this item in our inventory before actioning any of the results, because if we don't have it in our items in our inventory, it returns a null value, so the road type will be null. So going over to have a look at a quick test, we click equip the dagger, and up in the corner here you can see equipping weapon, again with a long sword. And if we equip steel armor, it comes up with armor and thin armoring. Now if we change this to 11, we're equipping an item type ID of 11, which is an apple. We're obviously not going to get anything because it's not of an armor or a weapon type. Okay, so now we need to expand these to if and else if statements. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll focus on equipping the armor, because the weapon will be exactly the same. We could probably in fact say if road type equals armor or road type equals weapon, but that would just mean breaking out into another if statement later on in the line, later on down the line. So I'll write out some of the code and then we'll come back over and review it. Okay, so I've put in some code here. What I've done is I've done a query which updates the user defense to equal the user's defense plus the item's defense, where the user ID equals the session user ID. Excuse me. And then once we've executed that query, we run another query which states that we insert into the player equipment, and we set the user ID and the armor slot And on a duplicate key, instead of inserting, we update, and that goes back to when we were looking at the hunt script. Just quickly go back over to it. We've got it here. We insert into player items, and on the duplicate key we update quantity. So the same logic is behind that goes into this. So we can then execute that query. Excuse me. Right, and after we've done that, we then run the check that we run in the inventory, doing it saying if the row quantity equals 1, then we delete the item from the player items table. Else we just remove 1 from the quantity. Now, something that we need to look at is equipping an item and taking back an item if one's already been equipped. Because if we equip an item on top of another item without giving that item back, then we're going to effectively lose that item. So we need to run a check to see if an item is already in that slot. So what I'll do is I'll generate the code and I'll put it in place, and then we'll have a look to see how it works. Okay, so the additions I've made here is just before the if and else if statements open up, we run another query and select the armor slot and the weapon slot from the player equipment table, where the user ID equals the session's user ID, and we execute that query and store the information in the current equipment variable. And just after we set that we update all the player's information and update the player equipment table. We then check to see if current equipment, the armor slot, is more than 0, which would mean there's an item already taken up in that slot. We then want to run the same query as we ran on the hunt page and insert into player items and set user item and the item ID at items, and on duplicate key update the quantity to equal quantity plus 1. And now another thing we also have to do is we have to then adjust the players table to remove the additional defense that original item was given the player. So I've added the extra 2 queries to run here. We're selecting defense from the game items table, where the ID equals the current equipment armor slot value, and we're gathering that information and just putting it into item stats, and then we're updating the players table and setting the user defense to the user defense minus the item stats defense value where the session user ID, and limiting it to 1. and then connecting. We're executing that query. After all that's been run, it then adjusts the player items table. Now we can copy that and apply it to the weapons, and we're just going to change a few values here. Let's change strength and to weapon. Now I've got to go through these carefully to make sure we get them all. And I think that's all of them. Fingers crossed. Okay, so we'll save that. And I haven't tested this whatsoever. So now will be the moment of truth as to whether it all works or not. So here we go. What we should see is that when we equip the dagger, my strength should go from 12 to 15, and our weapon slot will change from nothing to whatever the dagger value item ID is. So fingers crossed. Wait, before I do that, one tiny update needs to be done here. Now, which one is it? Okay, obviously we want to see updates immediately, so I've added onto the bottom, after we adjust the player items table, we've got on the weapons side, we've got the user strength equals user strength plus the rogue's strength, and that's not going to quite work how I want it to in cases of hold on, I'll be back now. I'm going to readjust this. Okay, so I've readjusted it. So on the armor side, after we update the players table on the first time round, we get we set the user's defense to equal to the user's defense plus the rogue defense. And then if we've got an item already equipped, then down the bottom here we've got user defense equals user's defense minus the item's stats defense. And again on the weapon side it's exactly the same thing, but with the user's strength we add the rogue's strength here, and down the bottom here we minus the item's stats strength. Now I'm going to keep you all in suspense, and we will test it in the next video. So join back then to see how many things will go wrong with this one.